and young people at the forefront of SDG action. Today, we will be focusing on SDG goals on climate action, life below water, and life on land. And at the same time, we will also look at goal 17, which is focusing on means of implementation and revitalizing partnerships, which is basically a cross-cutting goals across all SDGs. As of yesterday and day before, we have a great lineup of speakers, of resource persons, of youth solution speakers, and they will inspire us in order to ensure that we have great knowledge on the SDGs on goal 14 and 15. At the same time, we also have some actions. We get to know about actions around these goals on the ground. We have informed you of the dress code and this dress color campaign. So today we see many of you in green. That's very good. And so today's color code is green, and green signifies climate action and climate action for sustainable present and future. And over the last 2 days, we were having these conversations where the goal on climate action is actually in a negative trend, and SDG 14 and 15 actually need accelerated actions. So today we will hear and we will actually get to know more about these goals, and also see how we can take action. There, amongst you, there are many activists and advocates who are working towards climate action. So let's see, we will have a great session today. On some of the technical and the logistic aspects, I think you are all trying to comply with all the logistics and announcements. Also try to fill in the attendance sheet, because that's the most important thing as well for documentation purposes. Try to fill in the attendance sheet. We do see that there is great action on social media, so keep going. Today we are going to launch the call to action, all your hard work. Yesterday we were seeing some conversations around this discussion of empowerment and agency in the social media and also in the discussions in the chat, and that's a very valid point. Also, what we want to say is empowerment is the responsibility of the stakeholders, decision makers, because that is something that the state and different other agencies who are working on all these goals, it is their responsibility. And agency is what is the ultimate outcome. So everybody needs to participate in order to ensure that the agency of young people to claim their rights is possible. So that is the clarification, or, just to bring in that point, we thought it is important that we will share this with you. So today we will be having the recap from YouthLead. So we are having Ail from YouthLead who will be taking us through the recap. Over to you, Ail.
Thank you, Sai. Good morning, everyone. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Ail from YouthLead, based in Indonesia. Like Sai have said before we start our session in the third day, our last day, of course, let me recap what we have done and learned in the previous day, day 2 of APFSD 2022. In the day 2, we have 2 plenary sessions. The first plenary discussed about quality education, inclusive of comprehensive sexuality education, and also CSC of out of school. We have learned from Genderbased, UNESCO Regional Office on the Goal 4. She shared about the progress towards Goal 4 on quality education in the region. After that, Josephine Severin from UNFPA Regional Office has shared about progress towards comprehensive sexuality education in the Asia and the Pacific region. Then we also have listened youth solution speakers on SDG 4. Personally, I was really excited last day because listening their initiatives and programs really enjoy me and inspire me personally. We have 5 speakers. The first, Alexis G. Sebote from Philippines that share their excellence initiative with the SP's Youth Network. Then we have Sofana Shin from Cambodia that share basic education equivalency program, and also Rajesh Surang from Thailand that share Thai text-to-speech initiative. Shira Shreta from Yuwa, Nepal that share her initiatives regarding leadership and comprehensive sexuality education. And the last youth solution speakers, Muhammad Ray from Indonesia that share his Power to Youth program, Leaving No One Behind. Not only that, my friends, we also have launched the regional CSC campaign. For this, let me ask you one question. Have you registered your organization to join this campaign? I guess you have to check the website in the lunch meeting maybe, and submit your organization to join this great campaign for comprehensive sexuality education implementation across the Asia-Pacific. I also want to remind our second plenary session that talk about advancing gender equality in the Asia and the Pacific region. We have Arushi and Keisha who led our plenary session. And also we have Sivanti from Aro that explained about JEF regionalization and localization from CSO lands and avenues from youth engagement. Also we have Fanny Aren from UN Women who share about progress towards SDG 5, avenues for youth engagement, including GAP commitment. And for the youth solution on SDG 5, we have 5 great young people. I believe that you still remember. We have Arushi Khanna from Aro, who explained about EM 2020 SDGs Index and regional findings. Keisha Mehmood, who explained about harmful practices, early marriage, and female genital mutilation or cut. We also have Bandana Upreti from Nepal, who share about discrimination against women and girls. Saro Imran from Pakistan, who explain about discrimination and violence towards transgender women. And also Manisa Hada from Nepal, who share about technology and rights-based SRHR information and services. And after lunch, let me remind you, each of us discuss in our country group and produce recommendations for SDG 4 and SDG 5. And in the end of our day 2, you also have participated in the social media action. This was so fun, and I can find your pictures in my Twitter timeline, by the way, while I search hashtag CSE for all. Thank you, everyone who have participated in our social media action. To end my recap for the day 2, I would like to ask you, everyone in this Zoom meeting, to please write in the comment which session do you like in the day 2. Please write down in the chat box. I hope you can write now for 1 minute. Which session do you like in the day 2? I can see now the response from Nguyen Dung from Vietnam, SDG 5, breakout session, plenary, said Rastari Yaslan, discussion session, breakout room also, the session of SDG 5, plenary, wow, breakout session, and also Dr. Joe presentation. Okay, I see a lot of comments. Yeah, breakout room, really excited, right? Because we can share our experiences in our respective organization. Thank you, everyone who have responded to my question. I hope you can enjoy the last day of our APFSD Youth 2022. Feel free to learn a lot from our speakers and youth solution speakers. Thank you and see you. Bye-bye. I offer to Sai for this. Thank you, Sai. Over back to you.
Thank you, Al. And we will get started on the plenary session for today. And over to Deepa, who is the moderator.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day 3. today's session, we will start off with, as I said, today we are going to focus on climate action. So the first session for today is going to be on youth inclusive climate action. So climate action in the Asia-Pacific region, focusing on SDGs 13, 14, 15, and also looking at the cross-counting of Goal 17 as well. We will be looking at the progress, gap, and challenges, and also the ways forward. So for our speakers for today, we have Anita Nikolova, Mary Yon Strucker, and then we also have Manuel Castillo and our very own Sai as well. So our very first speaker will be Anita. I don't think Anita. So Anita Nikolova, she is an accomplished sustainable development professional with extensive experience in policy analysis, development and advocacy, capacity development and technical assistance to developing countries and countries with economies in transition in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. So Ms. Nikolova has a broad educational background with degrees in scientific information management, hydrology, and engineering geology, as well as European politics and administration. So Ms. Nikolova, do you want to go ahead? I'd like to welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome. Do you have the presentation or should I upload it?
Do you want to, yeah.
It might be more useful. Yes,
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I'm very happy to be talking to the youth representatives from the whole region. On the next slide, I would like to show you something that we all know. We're facing the biggest existential crisis of our times. And we know that climate change is a consequence of the way we actually have overused our natural resources on our planet. And our region is suffering the most. It's very vulnerable to all the changes. And we see this situation that is happening now with increasing climate events and also affecting the most vulnerable of the society. Well, the next slide, I would like to show you that actually our region, unfortunately, is one of is quite a big contributor to this situation as well, because of the drive to very intensive economic growth, which is also carbon intensive, emissions intensive. And on this slide, you see the categories of the countries, the top 10 countries. We also know that from the G20 group, our G20, 8 countries from our region are actually contributing over 45% of the global emissions. And there's also some historical responsibility of some of the members of the Asia-Pacific region. The next slide shows you, we did a research last year of all the NDC commitments. As you know, the intended national determined contributions that have been submitted earlier under the Paris Agreement were accepted as national determined contributions. Then the last 2 years, there were a lot of updates in our region. So we see that quite a lot of the ambition is there. Despite of the COVID, these NDCs were developed in a very difficult time. And the next slide shows you that we actually, from the 49 countries we started, 47 have updated their NDCs. And then 37 of these are very thoroughly updated in the last 2 years, and 6 of these are second NDCs. If we go to the next slide, I would like to show you a scenario that we have developed. We all know that the IPCC has recommended that globally the emissions have to be reduced with 45% of what was the level in 2010. So what we did is we looked at the contribution for that reduction for our region, for the Asia-Pacific region. And we identified a huge gap between the current commitments, which by 2030 will lead still to 29 gigatons of emissions from our region, while if we adhere to the 45% recommendation, we should be ending up at 11.9, close to 12 gigatons, which is 1/3 of this, of what is going to happen with the current planned commitments. So these commitments are not sufficient. They need to be revised further. And actually this is globally as well. And the COP26 ended up with the Glasgow Climate Pact, which recommended to go home and revisit again the NDC. So our region needs to do more about that. If we go to the next slide, we also have studied what can help the countries nationally to actually improve their assessment of their scenarios. Sorry. I hope if there's somebody with a comment, we could discuss that a bit later, right? So we looked at the enabling frameworks at the national level, and there are three big groups, right? One group is we looked at the raise climate ambition. The other one is strengthening enabling factors. And the third is the gender mainstreaming, which is a very important factor. If we go to the next slide, you would see the picture of the raise climate ambition. We looked, assessment was done on which countries have done carbon neutrality pledges, what kind of pledges are there to peak carbon emissions, then what kind of national level targets are there, sectoral level targets, and if there is introduction of carbon pricing or intention to do that, or looking at the fossil fuel subsidies. Based on this 6 groupings, we have designed a categorization of the country's level commitments to raising climate ambition. On the next slide, you would see that we looked at the, this is the latest update in February of all the commitments to carbon neutrality pledges. But I need to tell you that this, if you see the table, those that are the most serious are the commitments which are with the legal acts, with strong commitment of the government, policy documents, while the others are still in consideration. So the numbers are increasing. This is a positive thing. And then based on these, including this categorization was done for the whole region, that you see that still the countries, based on their readiness to raise their ambition, most of them are in the emerging slowly grouping, which means that they're still finding their way. And I believe this is because of the COVID-19 crisis. So they are trying to find better ways to deal with that. Only 14% equivocal, which means that they're really, really very ready, striving for the best at 10% and building their confidence 27%. So basically the groupings are still on the move, right? Then we looked at the enabling factors, and the enabling factors, the countries are doing a little bit better. We looked at several aspects, mainstreaming climate change into national laws and policies, and that is quite advanced everywhere in the region. Then we looked at the horizontal vertical coordinations. So with support from UN agencies, and because of the strive to update the NDCs, a good mechanism for coordinating between the ministries for developing the NDCs were created. However, the vertical coordination with local governments where the things are happening, with private sector, still need to improve further. We'll also looked at the climate finance readiness at the national level. And how we looked at it is that, okay, you have NDC commitments, but what are the budget allocations per sector from the national budget to deal with that? So if a country says unconditionally they can do, it means that they are ready to put their funding in reducing certain emissions, then this has to be based on available funds at home for the sectors, right? So then they could ask for additional funding, for additional support. And that is still to be developed further. Also, not many of the central banks in the countries in the region have taken decisive steps to put this as the highest priority. So many of them are assessing risk with climate change. They need to move forward into a different step to put requirements to the development banks, to the commercial banks, that they put a priority on low carbon investments. And then the final, the next aspect we looked at was the monitoring, verification, and reporting. This is the MRV system, especially now with the Climate Pact. There was a strong recommendation building the transparency frameworks. And for this, we see the civil society engagement very much in it, because there is a great potential. The governments could include local governments, civil society organizations, and the youth to help to monitor how actually emissions are reduced by enterprises, by local communities. So this is an area which is still very much underdeveloped. The most important was that we found out that if gender mainstreaming is put in all these factors, then commitments from the countries are stronger, and there's more opportunities for empowering women in their engagement into supporting climate action. When we go to the next slide, 12, you will see the categorization. And this is important finding that basically these factors are not depending on how rich the country is and how high the GDP is. So we see that countries with lower GDP, less income per capita, are much more committed to action. And we see that countries that we hire with the higher funding availability, so if you see in the 13th slide, next slide, you will see that basically countries where gender is more advanced, gender mainstreaming is more advanced, these countries are leading in their climate action and to the local level. If we go to slide 14, these are some very good summary of the findings. That, as I said, not only the high income countries are much further from what we expected from them based on their available budgets in terms of their commitments, in terms of their investments in their MRVs and transparency. Also, there's quite a lot of capacity. It's developing further, and there's an opportunity. The greatest opportunity is in further developing the monitoring, review, and the reporting systems in the countries. This is a must. If we go to the next slide, so what needs to be done after the COP now? As I said, it was recommended to revisit the national determined contributions, and basically, even if the commitments are not ambitious enough, we need to push, we as a civil society, we need to push the governments to really commit to what they promised. Also, they need to look into the carbon neutrality pledges. About the carbon neutrality pledges, for me, there's a big gap. If you've promised to be carbon neutral by 2050, but your NDC commitments are not ambitious enough, you would not be able to achieve that. So it is important to look into this, aligning the NDC commitments to support the carbon neutrality pledge. The countries need to actually adopt carbon pricing instruments to be able to generate revenues that will help for investments in renewable energy, clean energy. And one of the most important elements is to freeze any investments in new coal-based power plants, and to look into well-planned phase out. And most important, investment in nature-based solutions. Okay, not many governments like this term, nature-based solutions, but I would say ecosystems restoration is having a big opportunity to help local communities development, but also would have adaptation and mitigation impacts. And there's the most important also at the moment is to align the post-COVID recovery strategies with the NDC targets, even if these are not very ambitious, because there is a big disconnect and it's a very quick fix. And so continue the gender mainstreaming efforts because they pay back very much, increase efforts for national coordination, as I said, MRV systems. And this is for us, for the UN system, to create more opportunities for exchanging experience and engaging private sector. Next slide, please. I just want to tell you that what we are trying now, and we will bring to the attention of the member states at the committee, which is coming this year, in November 2022, we need to look into the NDCs in more critical way. So what could be done? Basically, countries need to really look at the scenarios they've developed and see if they can really, are they realistic in the terms of growth of the emissions currently. And then they need to look into the opportunities to adhere to the 45%, or at least to equal the emissions by 2030 with 2010 levels, if not reducing it with 45% at the national level. So they could assess this and see what is feasible, develop milestones and put them in their long-term low emission strategy. They have to be aligned. So these long-term low emission strategies need to support NDC, more ambitious NDCs. And what is the most important, this is the role of the youth as well and the civil society, is that we need to raise awareness among our population, our citizens, our local communities, that there is a need for climate-friendly behavior, understanding that we are all impacted by the climate change, but we all contribute. All of us contribute. So we need to change our patterns, our way of life. We need to look into different options, demand electric motorcycles, demand electric vehicles, electric buses as a start, demand for less plastic, no plastic, which is plastic is produced from fossil fuels. So it means less plastic, less fossil fuels, and demand stop of coal-fired power plants. And especially in Southeast Asia, we have, and in Pacific countries, we have such an amazing opportunity for using solar. And they use that even in Mongolia, where at the moment is -45, but they have, they endowed with a lot of sun during the winter. So it's possible even in a very cold climate. Well, this is from my side, and I look forward to your comments and to respond to your questions later on in the discussion. And thank you very much for inviting me. I hope you found this interesting review.
Thank you so much, Anita. So what we'll do is we will let all the speakers speak first, and then if there's any Q&A in the chat, I will raise some of the questions later as well. Thank you so much again, Anita, for those very important recommendations for all of us as well as member states that we need to do to ensure that we meet the 1.5 target. So before I call on the next speaker, I'd just like to remind all the speakers to keep in mind to keep your presentations to, within the time limit of 5 minutes. So thank you again. Yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it. Thank you so much again, Anita. So I'd like to call upon our next speaker. So our next speaker is Mary Yon Strucker from UNESCAP, who will be sharing on the life on land and progress in the region. So Marion works as a consultant for UNEP Asia and the Asia-Pacific office under the sub-program Ecosystem Management. Also committed to interdisciplinary and intercultural exchange between Europe and Asia, focusing on biodiversity, sustainable landscapes, and transboundary conservation. Marion Strucker, yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. Will you show my slides as well, kindly? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So hello, everyone, and thank you very much for this nice introduction. Distinguished participants and colleagues, it is really an honor to speak about SDG 15, Preserving Life on Land, which is a very dear topic to me, and I try to be very brief today. So next slide, please. Biodiversity is really the fundament on which human civilization is based on. And sometimes we seem to forget that we are part of the natural world and really depending entirely on the ecosystem services that nature provides. So healthy ecosystems, they regulate the material and energy flow for the planet, and also they provide all necessary services for our survival, which is fresh water or clean air or our food. So nature is really the basis of human well-being, and both for mental and physical health. On the other hand, biodiversity loss threatens the integrity of our ecosystems, and this is also demonstrated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which is in fact a biodiversity crisis. So animal, environmental, and human health are very much interlinked on different scales, from the planetary level through these ecosystem services up to the level of every individual through the symbiotic bacterial communities that are present in our bodies. So making peace with nature will really be one of the defining tasks of our age, in the words of the Secretary General. Next slide, please. The Asia-Pacific region is one of the most diverse regions in terms of social and cultural terms, but also regarding biological and geological diversity. We have the world's highest mountains and also the deepest ocean floors. Also, we have tropical forests and countless large or small islands. And therefore, we have a high number of different and unique ecosystems and a number of endemic species. We contain 17 of the 36 global biodiversity hotspots and 7 of the 17 megadiverse countries. So the biodiversity is really the basis of the livelihood of all the 4.5 billion inhabitants here. So, however, this region also has been really shaped by rapid economic growth and is with one of the fastest urbanization rates in the world. And this has led to a massive land use change. And as wildlife and human civilization are really close in this region, it has been also the origin of several recent and very concerning zoonotic diseases, including the coronavirus. If you want to know more about the status of biodiversity in the region, please have a look at the regional IPBES assessment. Next slide, please. Now, having set the scene, unfortunately, there's no sugarcoating it. We see a steep decline of species, mammals, birds, amphibians, insects, whole biodiversity. And of 7 measurable targets under the SDG 15, only one of them is likely to be achieved, which is the official development assistance for biodiversity. So the progress to protect key biodiversity areas has unfortunately also stalled. And even if the overall area of protected areas has increased since 2014, we still observe forest cover loss, habitat degradation, and fragmentation happening all over the region. So basically all major ecosystems at the moment are threatened. In a multi-stakeholder survey conducted by ASCAP, the key drivers and pressures on biodiversity have been identified as unsustainable economic development and land use change, so the direct conversion of habitats, then pressures on biodiversity due to agricultural intensification and the extensive use of agrochemicals, and last but not least, the over-exploitation of natural resources and deforestation, as well as illegal wildlife trade. Next slide, please. Now, what needs to be done to halt biodiversity loss and preserve life on land? So in the same multi-stakeholder survey, priorities for action were identified and clustered in 3 different themes. The first one is an integrated approach to nature-based action. So this is already a big one. We really need to mainstream biodiversity across all sectors and change our economies entirely. A huge part will be also in changing our food systems and the way we conventionally do our agricultural practices. We need to shift towards sustainability. Another factor here is to enhance the environmental dimension of the One Health approach. And if you're interested in this, maybe you can have a look at the UNEP report, Preventing the Next Pandemic. It might be very interesting for you. Theme 2 is data and finance and MEAs. We need to address a huge data deficit because it's just so hard to measure biodiversity. For example, it's so hard in comparison to, let's say, the hard units of CO2 emissions or, let's say, temperature. It's not easy to measure biodiversity. So we need to strengthen the science and evidence base. Also, of course, we need to increase funding and strengthen also our MEAs, so multilateral environmental agreements. And maybe an upcoming event it might be interesting for you is the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's the CBD COP15 this year, where the post-2020 biodiversity framework will be negotiated. So keep an eye on that. And then last but not least, we need stakeholder engagement and advocacy. So more awareness, engagement, and participation for SDG 15. And there we also need you. Next slide, please. For example, what you can do is you can have a look in your community and in your region, what are the threatened ecosystems or species maybe on the IUCN Red List, and what can you do to help them? We have just launched the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, and everyone has a role to play in this. So please have a look on this website if you are interested or want to look for more inspiration. And last but not least, next slide, please. I think the biggest difference that you can make is your own future and your own career choice. So think about what are you passionate about, what do you want to change in this world, and where do you want to contribute to? So I hope that you get a lot of inspiration in this forum, and thank you very much for your participation and engagement. And I'm happy to answer your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marian Stracker. And also, again, like she mentioned, please put in your questions in the chat and we will read it later. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and recommendation, and on especially stressing on the importance of, you know, ecosystem restoration and what we can all do, you know, to ensure we live the world that we want as well. So thank you again. I'd like to call upon the next speaker. So our next speaker, Manuel Castillo, is unable to be here in person, but he has sent a pre-recorded video. So just a little bit about Manuel. He's an environmental affairs officer at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia-Pacific, UNESCAP. He holds a legal master degree in European International Law from the University of Dresden, Germany. And he's also a doctor of law from the Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany. Can we play his video?
Dear colleagues and distinguished participants, thank you very much for the invitation to speak today at this very important forum. I'm honored to be here, and I'm really happy to know that there's hundreds of young people from across all sub-regions in Asia and the Pacific joining us today to show their commitment to sustainable development and also their support for the realization of the 2030 Agenda. Today, we will focus in this presentation on SDG 14, and I do want to share some of the findings that we have put together for a document that has been prepared for the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, which will be held next week. Based on the results of a survey conducted with stakeholders from across the region, we come to the conclusion that Asia and the Pacific is currently not on track to reach the targets related to SDG 14. And this is in particular important for marine pollution, for the conservation of coastal areas and marine resources, for small island developing states, and for the least developed countries in the region. We see on top of this that the ocean ecosystems are constantly struggling to moderate the impacts of the lifestyles that we have on land, that fish stocks continue to decline in a very unsustainable pattern, and that this situation has been exacerbated by climate change and the current ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Out of the 10 SDG 14 targets, we only have data available for 3 of them, in particular 14.1 that talks about marine debris and eutrophication, 14.5 on protected marine areas, and also on sustainable fisheries, 14.7. Unfortunately, for 2 of them, we're making some progress, but not enough at this rate. And for 1 of them, we're not making enough progress, but we're also regressing. Now, analyzing these targets separately, we see some issues that were already prevalent before the pandemic. For example, solid waste management. Municipalities were already struggling to manage the large volumes of plastics that they were collecting, and this has been exacerbated during the pandemic with the increase in single-use plastic consumption that came in the form of personal protective equipment and disposable face masks, as well as in food containers for takeaway food. A few countries have already made some progress here, introducing some bans on the specific single-use plastic products or introducing some sort of tax or levy to address the demand. However, this is not enough. We see a very strong commitment now, starting with the positive step of the UNEA 5 resolution that was very recent, and we're really hopeful that this will make an impact in the years to come. Now, when it comes to ecosystem degradation, we see that up to 90% of coral reefs in Asia and the Pacific are expected to suffer severe degradation by 2050, and this must stop. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing continues to be a problem across the region. It hinders the capacity of the ocean to recover, affecting fish populations and marine ecosystems, but also communities that rely on the ocean for their very food security and livelihoods. Marine protected areas have some good progress. For example, we have positive examples coming from the Pacific, and I want to highlight the National Marine Sanctuary Act from Palau, which established an 80% no-catch area in the country. We need more positive examples like this one. Integrating human rights and gender equality considerations, we have observed that there's still a lot to do when it comes to progress on SDG 14, and I would like to highlight 2 points here. One of them is that the maritime industry is still very much male-dominated, and we need to do more to promote the employment of women, not only in fisheries, but also across the value chain. The second one is that there are reports that during the COVID-19 pandemic, seafarers were stuck on ships, unable to disembark and return home due to the lockdowns and different restrictions, and this resulted in mental health issues and fatigue. The document we prepare for the forum to be submitted next week includes the next priorities for action. The first one is to improve data collection and sharing. The second one is to enhance policy design and implementation. The third one is to increase financing for sustainable practices. The fourth one, to enforce international treaties and regulations. And the fifth one, to promote regional cooperation to strengthen ocean governance. We continue to work with member states to support them in different intergovernmental processes and also developing knowledge products and conducting capacity development activities. And I want to highlight that we have developed a regional decade program to support the implementation of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development in Asia Pacific. We're preparing for the Ocean Conference, which will be held in Lisbon, Portugal in June this year, and we want to invite you to participate in our 5th Asia Pacific Day for the Ocean, which will take place on the 29th of October this year. We also have different projects that involve nature-based solutions, and we try to integrate the protection of the ocean also as a solution to tackle climate change, among others. To conclude this presentation, I would like to leave you with 3 recommendations regarding your personal contributions to the progress we're making on SDG 14. The first one is to engage in the conversations and to participate actively. This is something you're already doing by joining the forum today. The second one is to exercise your power as responsible consumers and responsible users. So next time you buy a product, you should ask yourself, is there an alternative to single-use plastic? Or next time you use an ecosystem service, for instance, in tourism, can you make sure that this practice is sustainable? Is there a way you can reduce the footprint? And the third one is to be an advocate for change. Try to make a positive impact on your community, on your family and friends around you, and make sure that input includes the protection of the marine environment. Thank you very much for your participation today. Have a great forum.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for that. I would like to, so again, please put in your questions, but Manuel will not be here to answer, but I'll definitely open it up for the rest of the panelists as well. I would like to call upon next, our next speaker is our very own Sai, who will be speaking on the climate action, gender equality, and SRHR. Sai, over to you.
Thank you, Deepa. And I think from the previous speakers, we have understood how gender mainstreaming is quite important in order to achieve the goals of climate action and also accelerate actions towards goal 14 and goal 15. What I will do now is to just provide some more evidence on the intersections of gender, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and climate action, and provide you that information so that you are aware of what are those connections. Arrow, as a regional organization, we are looking at these intersections, so we have this evidence that we can share with you. We can go to the next slide. So this is the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and its Gender Action Plan, and this was adopted in this was also discussed at COP25. So gender mainstreaming was actually done in different COP meetings. In 2014, the Lima Program of Action was adopted, and in 2019, there was this Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and Gender Action Plan. And what it actually says is Gender Action Plan recognizes climate change impacts on women and men, and they often differ owing to historical and current gender inequalities and multidimensional factors, and can be more pronounced in developing countries and for local communities and indigenous people. It also acknowledges that capacity building, knowledge management, and sharing of experiences are essential to supporting relevant actors in designing and implementing gender-responsive climate action and for increasing the effectiveness and scaling up of these measures. So there is definitely some international guidance on how we can mainstream gender into the work around climate action. We can go to the next slide. And based on the work of Arrow, what do we know thus far? This is a recent publication that had come out, and it is a regional publication which has done some capacity needs assessment in Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And this looks at accelerating gender-responsive climate action through empowering CSOs. And we are part of this initiative, and this report basically shines light on these aspects, and I will be sharing some insights from this report. We can go to the next slide. So what do we know? We know that climate and disaster risk-induced vulnerabilities of men, women, marginalized groups, and the ultimate impact should these risks, and the risks that we are talking about is around climate and disaster-induced risks, should these risks be realized, they are not gender neutral. So that is the point that we need to make, because the impact of all this crisis are different on men, women, marginalized communities. Women and girls in all their diversities disproportionately bear these adverse impacts due to already existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. These pre-existing inequalities, they stem from a complex interplay of social, cultural, legislative, and institutional factors which create barriers for climate resilient societies with women as equal partners and beneficiaries, although I don't like the term beneficiaries. We can go to the next slide. So what are these barriers which already exacerbate, the risks that women and other gender experience? So we all know that there are these socio-cultural barriers, and the triple burden of work for women. This results from the social norms that are already ascribed as a result of the gender roles. We all experience it in our daily lives. Women are often bound by the role of caregiving, the unpaid work that they do, the menial jobs that they get into when they get into the economic activities. Women actually spend 3 times as much of work as men in unpaid domestic care work. And women and girls in developing countries can spend up to 10 hours a week gathering fuel, gathering water, which is about 15 hours a week. And this is some of the evidence that is shown. We can go to the next slide. In terms of legislative barriers, what are those legislative barriers? We know that in the region, there are many discriminatory laws that exist. And these discriminatory laws can be in the areas of marriage, in the areas of inheritance, divorce, and these further create barriers for women to access and have control over resources. Many countries still have laws from colonial period that have not been updated, and laws where formal laws coexist with personal and customary laws. In a study that was done by FAO, it showed that only 1/3 of reporting countries have provisions guaranteeing gender equality in land ownership and or in control of national legal frameworks. So land ownership is very key, but at the same time, we see that land ownership is not in the hands of women or persons of other gender, but even if it is in their hands, they do not have the real control. We can go to the next slide. Institutional. So what are those institutional barriers that women face? Firstly, in participation in policy, in political and in institutional decision-making spaces. Most public bodies do not have the knowledge and skills to mainstream gender, which prevents bringing in a gender perspective into the policies and plans that are being done at national level. And in 81 countries, there has never been a woman head of state as of 15th January 2021. And this is some graph that actually shows whether women are in parliaments, what is the percentage of women at local governments, and how many women contribute to as ministers. We can go to the next slide. And also in terms of technology, and we see that technology is, again, it is not gender neutral. So technology continues to change the way the world is operating, and especially in the post-COVID world, we see that technology is the strength that we all need to have. But then often gender neutral approach to technologies makes the adoption of technologies difficult for women. Unsuitability of the technology, the inertia, the affordability, the lack of trainings often drive poor technology adoption amongst women. And the COVID-19 pandemic has also accelerated automation and digitalization, which I've just said, and more women are bearing the brunt of this transformation. We can go to the next slide. And then when it comes to information, now there are information barriers. And what are those information barriers? Number one, firstly, there is lack of information in understanding what are the climate risks, what is the impact resulting from this inaccessibility to information. Communities, especially women, do not have information on weather warnings, on resilient practices, or information on accessing the institutional services like the legal system or agricultural extension services. And the second gap is basically in terms of data. Because we have also seen some of the previous speakers talking about lack of data that is disaggregated by sex, by age, by disability. And this again is a key barrier. We can go to the next slide. So just talking about these gender-based vulnerabilities, there is increase in mortality, morbidity, and marginalization of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Health impacts are gender-specific, with women and girls facing unique challenges as a result of their physiology. And sexual and reproductive health and rights are least prioritized in humanitarian settings. I think we all know this, those who are working in the area of SRHR. Scarce resources such as food, water, medicine within the families after typhoons have increased infant mortality, and especially infant mortality amongst girls, and this is evidence-based. So then I think one of the conclusions that comes out of all this of the study is that it is important to address gender, and this is beyond the binary that we also need to keep at the back of our minds, and that for us to do this analysis, we need to have data for the gender across its spectrum. So that is again a data gap, and these all need to be done. You can go to the next slide. So some recommendations that have come out of that report are to address the technical knowledge needs to design gender responsive, gender specific, and gender transformative actions, advance the leadership capacities of women, young people, advocacy capacities to engage with local governments and public bodies. You as young people can be at the forefront of doing this. Organizational development, resource mobilization, investments and financial investments are very critical. And then addressing gender and climate change policy frameworks. At the international level, definitely there is this gender action plan. Now, we will have to see how we can connect the global gender action plan at the regional and at the national level, but also ensure that our governments are having the nationally determined contributions, and gender and young people's issues are incorporated within that, and also build national frameworks for monitoring and evaluation and monitoring the implementation of the gender action plan. So these are some of the findings that are focused on gender that has come out of that report. And this is what I thought we should be sharing with you. And you can also look at it from the lens of young people. We can move to the next slide. Yes, the climate is changing, and so should we, and we should be acting now. And especially in this region, we have to be acting now on climate action. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sai, for this presentation. That is definitely, keeping us in, making us, allowing us to remember the disproportionate, gendered impacts that climate change has, and to ensure that, this is recognized and is always considered when, we talk about policy and advocacy as well. So before we go to the next session, for the next round of speakers, there are a couple, so there are only one question and one thought. So I'd just like to share that. So the first one is for Anita. I'm just going to read it out, and Anita, you can share your thoughts on this. So this is from Jitender. So Jitender shared that it is a little disconnected from the global South reality. For example, plastic is the only means to carry out various activities. So the onus of developing sustainable methods of reducing carbon should be on the governments and MNCs rather than the people, because people cannot afford to reduce carbon. Meanwhile, the larger MNCs, including in the West, whose branches are in the global South, keep producing carbon and wrecking the environment in the global South. So it's often talked about, but rarely acknowledged. So they also included, for example, the 1984 Bhopal gas strategy, a USA company's factory that ended up killing thousands and harming the environment. And their CEO, who was directly liable for it, lived a lavish life in the US and even changed his company's name. So Jitendra shared that he finds us rather disconnected from the reality, and the onus is often, put on the global South people. Anita, would you like to address this?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, it's all viable points, of course, and this is the common and differentiated responsibility that has been on the agenda of the discussions for 20-something years, right? But if we keep saying that developing countries have the right to use plastic because it is helping their livelihoods, I think we are not honest with each other, right? Because we know where this plastic ends up. That's beyond the climate action work, right, that I'm talking about. But we know about the islands of pollution, and the fish, even the fish, which is an amazing livelihood, is full of that already. So there's enough evidence of it. So we need to take action. Why don't we use more in the global south here, right, in the Southeast Asia, different way of delivering food? I mean, there's not really that much. There's other ways to do that, with durable plastic included in the packaging, with banana leaves, with different ways of doing it. I mean, why do we need to have so much deliveries of food, right? We could cook ourselves. I mean, I would like to apologize to the younger people, but I see a trend that the young people are not really that much into cooking, into doing basic things like repairing their clothes. We have this very high consumptive culture. Every year a new phone. I mean, we are all contributing to that. So at the end of the day, it's at the level of every individual to do its own part, and to also sensitize the people around them. Young people, even children, are very good advocates for cleaner environment. They teach their parents, they demand their parents to have different lifestyle. I know that because my two sons are teachers. One of them is a teacher in his school, and he's amazed because, well, we are all green growth family. So he has been instilling these ideas into his students. The change needs to start with each other first, and raising awareness, and it's our responsibility to learn more. Learn about the impact of our lifestyle. It's our responsibility. Why do developing countries need to repeat that development pathway which has led to the destruction and to their own problems? Why? And it's loss of, for example, if we take the Pacific countries, they're dependent on oil, which is so expensive. The budgets that they are using to bring the oil into their countries, and at the same time, if you see the trajectories of the Pacific countries, all of them have planned triple and quadruple growth of emissions, and calculated their NDC commitments based on that. They don't even have the 10 years to exist as islands, Kiribati, and all the others. I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening. We as citizens need to demand different lifestyle and different policies and different things from our governments. We have to learn to do that and not to comply, and we need to change at our own level. I'm sorry, I don't want to be preaching. I'm saying that with honesty because I try to live like this. That's my lifestyle. So it's not a preach. It's just the way I am also. Sorry.
Thank you so much for that, Anita. So there are a couple of questions also on the chat. I know a few of them are directed at Sai, but Sai, I would like to invite you to maybe respond to that on the chat. So in the interest of time, we do have one more question that I thought I will address it to Mary on, if that's okay, before we go to the next round of speakers. So Marie, if you are here, this question is from Utkarsh. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. So it says that nowadays the topic of climate action is included in the school curriculum and for students on a regular basis. So that's being talked about. So from your point of view, which particular subject or curriculum should be included, or which are points that need to be stressed?
You mean for climate change? Well,
Yes.
if I think about which I always wanted in my school curriculum to also have, for example, other sustainability. I think climate change is maybe one part of it, but just sustainability in general is also, I would say, a way of critical thinking in a way to really reflect on ourselves and also think about what could be done differently in the world. So it's really also about critical thinking, and especially in the Asia-Pacific region, I would really wish that critical thinking would be a part of the education. That's just my personal opinion. And in terms of climate change, if that has been already incorporated in the curriculums, that's actually great and a very great step forward. And from my perspective, of course, I would wish that we speak of ecosystems and ecosystem services, biodiversity in nature, also maybe incorporated in the curriculum. So maybe a big sustainability sustainability lecture or a sustainability subject, because I would say the planetary crisis, we have now three different planetary crises. One is climate change, one is biodiversity loss, and the other one is pollution. They are all interlinked, interconnected, and it's sometimes not easy to separate one from each other. So if you just have a look at the tipping points for climate, they are very much also linked to the ecosystems. So all in all, I would say it's not easy to always separate climate change from ecosystems or biodiversity and pollution. It's one sustainability curriculum that we should integrate in the school, if that makes sense. Just my personal opinion, of course.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for that. I hope we were able to address some of the questions that you all have, and keep that going. And I really like to welcome all the speakers if you are able to address some of the questions on the chat as well. And then now we are going to go into the youth solution speakers. So we spoke a lot about, everyone shared about how, youth can take action and what you can do. So of course, everything comes with challenges, and we all have our own limitations, but we all can do our part in how, we are able to. So I would like to invite some of the youth speakers who can actually share what they have done and what, and maybe this can inspire all of you as well. So our first speaker for today will be Muhammad Hassin Ahmed, who is a fourth-year student at the Department of Coastal Studies and Disaster Management at the University of Barishal, Bangladesh. Muhammad Hassin, please go ahead and share your story.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Muhammad Hassin Ahmed, and this is my presentation on a project titled Driven Away by Storm, the Stories of Climate Migrants in Khulna City, Bangladesh. This project was funded and developed with associations with International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICAD, Youth Climate Lab, YCL, and their joint initiative, Climate Resilience and Collective. This project ran for a month or so back in 2021, from August 2021 to September 2021. And this basically concentrates on why people migrate from the native land to cities, what drives them to migrate, what are the stories behind their migration, and what are the current living conditions. So that was the basic theme of this project. Now, a bit about the background study of this project. Back in 2009, May 25, a devastating cyclone named Ayla literally annihilated the southwestern coastal region of Bangladesh. It affected more than 3 million people, destroyed several thousand homes, and killed more than 190 people. This massive destruction forced thousands of families to seek shelter in the nearby cities, and many of them permanently decided to live in those cities, making them climate migrants. So our project, as I mentioned before, concentrates what are the stories behind this migration, why they chose to migrate, and what are the current living conditions. So this is the study area location. This is the map of Bangladesh, and here marked in red is the district of Khulna. This is a map of Khulna City Corporation. So many of the migrants who migrate to cities actually choose places where rail stations and port areas are nearby. So my study area involved a rail station area where day labor jobs are easy to access. So when they arrive first in the city, they tend to settle within these regions where day labor jobs can be accessible in a fast manner. So these areas literally are teeming with migrant families right now. The basic stakeholders of this project were all the migrant families that I interviewed during my project. These brave young women shown in this particular picture below are some of the bravest community leaders I've ever faced. They helped me amply to identify the migrant families from the normal families, and their contribution was really huge during this project. And also local politicians, local NGO representatives were also interviewed to collect their opinion on these families and their livelihoods. So the stories, now this is something that often gets lost under loads of stats and measurements while collecting data for this kind of situations. Stories are something that tells us what drove them from their native land to this particular predicament they're in right now. So we concentrated heavily on that. So these are basically 3 representative stories from our project. So first up is the story of Mrs. Roshanara and her family. She and her family had the misfortune of facing this devastating cyclone back in 2009 firsthand in Shyamnagar, Satkhira. Her family of 8 floated for an entire day in saline surge water on broken tree branches. Her husband, Mr. Mujibur Rahman, who wasn't near her during the cyclone, who was selling fish in a different city, had to swim for 10 hours just to reach his family. Later, after floating almost like an entire day, they were rescued and taken into a cyclone shelter. Their entire homeland were submerged in saline water, making that absolutely barren. And they had to then take the tough decision and move their entire family to Khulna city. This is another story of Mr. Aminul Islam and his family. They'll both live in the same slum. He had the misfortune of facing the cyclone in Dakob Khulna, which is another area widely affected by this kind of cyclonic activities annually. So he had hopes and dreams about increasing his native lands. He had 1.3 acres of crop field, and he was saving money to increase that. But he had to spend his every last penny just to relocate his families in a slum area in Khulna city. This is the story of Mrs. Jahanara Begum and her family. She is really quite the brave woman. Had to shift her entire family from Koira, Khulna alone, as her husband wasn't near her during the time, as her husband was already working in Khulna city as a migrant worker. Her settlement process was a little bit easier than the other families, as her husband was already there in the slum before she arrived. But she had to do all these arrangements alone, and the fear of losing even a child during the huge travel from Koira to Khulna city still haunts her and still devastates her psychologically. So more stories like these were covered during our project, and we really heavily gave importance on their experience of what they faced and what they saw during this migrating process. So many problems were identified during this project in their current locality, in their current slums they're living in right now, like constant fear of eviction, because these people are living on lands that are owned by the Khulna railway station authority. So these lands do not belong to them. So they are living kind of illegally. So, and they do get evicted. Like they were last evicted in 2016 due to a development project. Khulna rail station reclaimed the land and evicted them. So they do live in constant fear of eviction. They have water, sanitation, and hygiene related problems. Some NGOs have established certain facilities for them, but as the land doesn't belong to them, or the locality, they have some legal issues while even establishing such facilities. So that's a problem. There are also flood-related problems because these slums are situated near the Rupsha River, which does flood the banks during the monsoon. And of course, there are safety and security-related problems because they all live in a congested slum area, and they don't have any legal electricity supply in their current inhabitant. And there's also a massive problem of resettlement near the railway tracks. So as I mentioned before, back in 2016, Khulna Railway Station Authority evicted these people to reclaim their land, but the evicted people then again resettled right along the railway tracks. So this is very dangerous as a living place because from the railway tracks, 3 meters distance from the tracks must be emptied for the safety of the trains, but they live right near there. The authority knows about it, but tolerate it because these people doesn't have anywhere to go, and this is a humanitarian crisis, and they don't have a plan for them either. So they're just accepting that, yes, people do live near the railway tracks in an unsafe condition. But slight development did happen after certain reporting under this project. So during this project, I spoke to some of the representatives of BRAC, one of the largest NGOs of our country, and they did agree with the selected problems and the severity for this community. But the community people wasn't that hopeful that BRAC would take initiatives to solve any of the problems. But much to their surprise, BRAC did, within 2 months, established a sanitation facility right along the railway tracks for those communities, despite all the legal troubles. So kudos to BRAC, I guess. Reporting sometimes does help, does bring changes. So in the end, my recommendation would be more voluntary and private initiatives, as government initiatives are very hard to come by. Perhaps introduce some sort of scholarships for migrant children, as they're very behind due to their current predicament in education background. Perhaps employment workshop for the migrants, because they are literally competing with the present citizens of Khulna for the same jobs. So they need some sort of push, some sort of incentive and workshops so that they can contribute better. And perhaps introduction of some sort of small quotas for them as well. And most importantly, a small land donation, as they don't have any legal land. And the one single entity that can actually bring devastating changes to their lives is government. But I guess that will be very hard to come by. So till then, we'll need more private and voluntary initiatives, because their current predicament is not their fault. This is some of the most complex and puzzling effect of climate change, and direct climate action can bring change. I'm very hopeful about that, and hope you'll be hopeful about that as well. So thank you everyone for giving me this slot. And if you have any questions, you can ask me in the chat box. I'll put my email address there as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammad Tassim. Those are really, wonderful recommendations, and I think they're all, doable as well for all of us. And there are already some questions already on the chat, so feel free to, address them on the chat. And thank you once again. So I'd like to call upon our next youth speaker. So this will be Ellie Clint Lagrimas from the Philippines, who will be sharing on life underwater and youth action. So Ellie is a student leader and a pre-service teacher from the Philippines Normal University in the Caraga region, Philippines, taking up a bachelor's degree in social studies education. So Ellie is online, but we will be doing this on a pre-recorded video. So again, Ellie will address your questions on chat, so feel free to drop it there. Please go ahead and play the video.
Destructive human practices coupled with climate change have led to the degradation of Philippines' rich marine biodiversity. Although there are existing environmental education programs, most of these are aimed at adults and not at children. As the pandemic disrupted social mobility, children's inaccessibility to environmental education has exacerbated. Salom, Diving into the Waters, is a website which aims to educate kids about marine life and dive into the concepts of conservation through animated stories and interactive quizzes. This website utilizes innovative strategies and is designed with creative features that simplify complex concepts for the kids to grasp the lessons easily and put them into action. Salom is inspired by Project Tricultur Sikad para sa Limpiong Dagat, a project funded by Save Philippine Seas, Y Sealing, and U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. During the 2019 C-Count. The proponents are environmental advocates and pre-service teachers from Philippine Normal University Mindanao who are equipped with the knowledge and skills in teaching and developing instructional materials. Through Salom, we aim not just to educate the kids of today, but to build a generation of responsible citizens who have the heart for marine life. Now, will you dive with us? Destructive.
Good day, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to thank the organizing body for this wonderful opportunity where we can share our initiatives in the community. I am Eliclint Lagrimas from the Philippines, the co-founder and communication director of Salom Diving into the Waters. So last 2019, before the pandemic started, I was working on a project that was founded by a friend of mine. I volunteer as a teacher, and what we do is that we visit coastal communities to teach children about marine conservation and environmental protection through storytelling, fun games, and art activities. So we've been doing coastal cleanups and mangrove planting as well, but our project focuses more on teaching kids since the group is composed of future educators. We value the importance of early childhood education because a child's early years are believed to be the foundation of his or her future development, and by teaching them these simplified concepts of conservation, we know that it will stay with them as they grow and use it throughout their lives. However, the project was put to halt due to health and mobility restrictions caused by COVID-19 pandemic, and because of that, children's inaccessibility to environmental education has exacerbated, and this prompted us to innovate and use technology to continue our dedication to our environmental advocacy, resulting in the formation of Salom diving into the waters. So Salom, it is a website that will educate children about marine life and explore concepts of conservation through animated stories and interactive quizzes in the comfort of their homes. So Salom is a local dialect, which means to dive, and having a website is our way of bringing the underwater to the virtual screens. So currently, we are pilot testing our website to different primary schools here in our region, and as of now, about 300 students were able to access our website. And before introducing them to the website, we also conduct learning sessions during the implementation. And based on observations and assessment results, the outcome is positive as our success indicators such as increasing children's knowledge and understanding of marine life and ecosystems, as well as raising their awareness of the various destructive human practices that endanger marine life and ecosystems, were met because of high evaluation scores. And apart from that, they were able to complete the task assigned to them while using the website. And following our pilot testing, we will make some changes based on the feedback from teachers and students before releasing it to the general public. So, working on the project, I realized that indeed it takes a community or an ocean to speak to educate a child. Our dream is to build a generation of responsible citizens who have the heart for marine lives. And we hope that you guys here will dive with us. Thank you so much. Good day, everyone.
Thank you very much for that, Ellie. So now, again, one more reminder, if you have any questions for Ellie for the wonderful presentation on life below water and, the actions that they're currently working on, please go ahead and drop any questions you have on the chat, yeah? I think I saw a question about the website. Ellie, if you're online, can you please share the website on the chat as well? Next, I'd like to call upon our final youth speaker for today. So this is Zara Mutiara, who will be sharing on life on land and soil youth action. So Zara Mutiara is fueled by her passion in understanding the nuances of cross-sectoral issues of climate crisis in land use sectors. So she possesses a broad and current knowledge on in-depth field experiences in Southeast Asia, and this enables her to be effective in delivering intended changes on climate interventions in the region. Again, Zara's intervention will be via pre-recorded video as well, so we can play that.
Good day to you everyone. I am Zara Mutiara, and I wish to start my brief remark by sharing with you a glance about the ongoing situations from the tropical landscape in our region that are sometimes hard to admit. For too many years, we have been causing severe damages to the land we live in, and as a foundation of a thriving life, the health and sustainability of our land ecosystem is supposed to not only be a cause, it is really the key to our own survival. And so that's the reason why, as a youth, I am committed to contribute pursuing a specific Sustainable Development Goal 15 on life on land. And considering this, multiple use of tropical landscape, it is also pertinent to the attainment of another SDG on climate action. Personally, my journey, my engagement with the tropical landscape in Southeast Asia started with me moving to live and learn together directly with communities around the border of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei in Borneo Island. I learned about supporting conservation, social, and also economic activities using simple languages that are understandable for our communities on the ground. This attempt was building on the Heart of Borneo program, that is a multi-country conservation initiative for sustainable development in 220,000 kilometers square of transboundary area. Such first-hand experience definitely provided me a strong footing and close connection to understand how similar environmental challenges that our region is facing in relation to climate crisis. And this realization has brought me further to dedicate myself and focusing on initiating collaborations with different groups of actors across countries in Southeast Asia. I also realized that in order for positive changes to be amplified, certain scales and also certain policy fields needs to be reached. And I am fortunate to be able to work closely with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations that grants me this unique window of opportunity to bring together an official target group of policy advocacy from 10 ASEAN countries to promote a common understanding and a joint efforts to deal with climate crisis in land use sectors. This has been very much facilitated by the establishment of ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, where during this, past 2 years of COVID-19 pandemic time alone, the network conducted more than 20 workshops, trainings, and dialogues with, I believe, over more than 850 participants. And one of the featured interventions that the network is offering is to enhance the capacity of policy knowledge and skills in young government officials that are assisting their countries in the regional or global decision-making processes and also ultimately national policy processes. So through this program, we really wish to bring different lenses of perspectives while connecting more young policymakers with the on-the-ground realities. Although, there are many nuances and intersections of various sectors and actors to achieve this healthy and resilient tropical landscape as what the Sustainable Development Goals wish to achieve. Amidst all that, if there are values that we should push forward from my point of view, there will be these three things. The first one is the importance of putting together field experiences and voices from the ground in the realm of public policy as we respond to this climate crisis. Second is to jointly consider commonalities of challenges and unified actions that we could share and amplify in Asia and Pacific. And thirdly, I wish more focus is given to devise a policy ecosystem where fair access, fair participation, and fair benefits to youth is guaranteed, not only to the groups of elites, but especially for youth whose lives rely closely on the health of tropical landscape. So those are the main things I wish to share with you today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. I think all three speakers really, shared very inspiring stories and, different things that we can all do as well. So again, I think some of the speakers are already communicating on chat. So please go ahead and, reach out to them on the chat. If you have any questions, you want to know more and how you can communicate and get in touch with each other. Yeah, so our next, what we're going to look at is the SDG 17. So the goal 17 this year is a cross-cutting, will be cross-cutting across all the other goals as well. And it's also under review for this year. So for this, we'd like to invite Dr. Dennis Kala, who is the regional coordinator and representative of the UN OSSC, to share a little bit on this SDG 17. Dennis, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Co-convenors, it is my pleasure to be invited to speak here on the Youth APFSD for 2022 on Goal 17, which is about partnerships and cooperation. I think you will agree with me that given that this goal cuts across all the other goals, it is very difficult to quantify, to give numbers to it. So what I'll be doing today is to look more at what are we talking about when we relate to cooperation? What is the scope and breadth of cooperation? Who is participating? And then I'll talk about some of the driving philosophies behind this cooperation. So before I go into that though, I'll probably say something that has already been said quite a lot in the meeting. And that is how important youth are to the Sustainable Development Agenda, how important you are to cooperation. Over 60% of the world's youth between the ages of 15 and 24, I understand, live in Asia-Pacific, 60%. And that as of now, 750 million people between the ages of 15 and 24 reside in Asia Pacific. So obviously what we have to do in sustainable development, achieving these goals, it means that as the young people in Asia Pacific become of age, enter the labor market and work, they're going to have a significant say in the success of sustainability. And then secondly, I also wanted to mention that with the goal, we are talking about all sectors from education to science and technology to political, social. So it is quite a very broad subject of discussion, and I'll try to limit it to the time that we have. Let me start by saying when we talk about cooperation, international cooperation, who are we talking about? I think generally we tend to think about countries cooperating, but countries are just what they are, countries. In those countries, you have people and institutions. These are the entities that collaborate. So in each country, you may have government departments, like government agencies, participating and working with each other, with other countries. You may have the private sector, of course, working in other countries. That is also cooperation. You may have civil society and even academic institutions working with other countries in cooperation. But you also have, in terms of financing, philanthropic organizations that may provide assistance, as well as what we have traditionally called the donors. But the donors in this case, it may be what we call partners in the context of South-South and triangular cooperation. And so we can see that the players is a multi-stakeholder group of players in cooperation. Now, the next question that I would like to address is, for the cooperation, what is required? Usually, when there is cooperation, there are resources passing from one partner to the other. And it may include money in terms of concessional funding, in terms of grants. But sometimes some people argue that even the commercial funding is also included as part of cooperation. Another area where there's cooperation is technical expertise, where country has got maybe experts in a certain area, and another country doesn't have the experts, and they work out a mechanism for exchange of people to help each other. Another area that received a lot of debate in the past as to whether it's cooperation or not is trade. But trade is cooperation indeed, particularly when it comes to the aspects of trade where there are tariff relaxations to help some countries, where maybe tariffs are completely removed. This is done for cooperation altogether. And so in that regard, we have to look at trade as also an area of cooperation. But perhaps the most driving factor in terms of the growing of smaller countries, of less developed countries, is investment by other countries, other private sector from the other countries. So investment, whether it's regional, whether it's driven from north-south, is still a very, very important aspect of meeting the Sustainable Development Agenda. The other areas of cooperation also include technical expertise, exchanging knowledge, technologies. And I think you'll agree that in the most recent years, we have understood that knowledge is a very important aspect of the work that we do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly sharing information about the solutions to development that already exist. Like I saw a bit of what the young people were sharing just before this session. That's what we are talking about. That knowledge can be used and customized to actually help with development. And then another aspect that I want to talk about in terms of cooperation is that there has to be some way of organizing the entities for that cooperation. And for a lot of you, you will know that in this region, we have ASEAN, we have SAC, we have ECO, we have got PIF in the Pacific and PIDF. These are all regional organizations where countries with common interests or are trying to address common challenges come together and create a mechanism for doing that. Another way of doing it is that we have very specialized intergovernmental organizations that focus on specific areas. For example, in this region, in Pakistan, there's COMSAT, which is the Commission on Science and Technology for the South, for example. And then yet another way of collaborating is that you have United Nations agencies and other international bodies working with governments, with regions, creating what are called centers of excellence, which are usually very specialized in certain areas and provide services to the countries. So those are some of the arrangements that are used to achieve cooperation. But what you need to do that, oh, I forgot to say, probably the most common arrangement is the project. It is the project, and we know that in development, we mostly work with projects. So it is yet another way of achieving collaboration. But what do we need to actually collaborate? We need policies and frameworks. So in most cases, people don't just get together and say, we are going to do this without putting those frameworks and policies. Examples are that during the COVID outbreak, a number of countries came together and they find common ground on what they're going to do, how they're going to collaborate. Sometimes it is written, sometimes it is implicit, but you do have to have that. So I don't have much time. I want to now go to one area which I consider to be quite important in terms of cooperation. And this is what kind of cooperation, the broad categories of cooperation that we have. For most of us, we know about the North-South cooperation, which was also called ODA, overseas development assistance, and so on. That has been the modality of cooperation for a very long time, and it still remains, by and large, the most dominant and prevalent. But during the times when a number of countries were becoming independent from colonization, they thought we should have a concept that helps us help each other as developing countries. And during the 50s to the 60s, there was the development of the concept of technical cooperation among developing countries. And as I said, the idea with this was that, yes, we are receiving some assistance from the developed countries, but we should be able to help ourselves. So the idea is not about money, but the idea is that we work together, we have empathy, we come from this common experience. And so TCTC was not really about money, but about getting together and working together. This concept was later translated and changed into South-South cooperation. I work for the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. So up to today, this is what we continue to support. Countries from the developing world, the global South, trying to help each other. Not only financially, but in many other ways than financial. The last, I said there are three of them. The last one is a hybrid between the two, between North-South cooperation and South-South cooperation. So this was an attempt to have the developed countries continue to support cooperation, but with the principles of South-South cooperation embedded in that cooperation. And we call this triangular cooperation. The way that it looks, that it usually has two or more developing countries supported by a developed country. That's why we call it a triangular cooperation. So again, no time to expound very much on this because I think I have only got less than 10 minutes. I go to the last point, which is the role of the youth. So I already mentioned that Asia Pacific as a continent is yet as a continent to achieve its demographic dividend, which means that these young people will all be in the labor force. So it will be a very powerful avenue for changing the ways that things are done. And that's why for those of us who work with young people, either in the United Nations or elsewhere, we try to talk about a mindset, a change of mindset. Earlier on, I was listening and somebody was saying, we don't have to make the same mistakes that were done before. Our generations made some mistakes, and I hope that your generations do not make the same mistake. And what do I mean by that? One is that collective progress is better than individual progress. For a long time, I think people were taught that you have to go to school, learn, and make money, and you're happy. And I don't think it's that way. Instead, we should be looking and following the mantra of leaving no one behind. And like a tide which lifts all the boats on an ocean, each one of you should think of themselves as a tide that tries to lift others around you. And that is that means that you have to think as a global citizen. What happens in another part of the world affects you. A few years ago, we're seeing people, what we called migrants, moving from one part of the world to another. So unless the other person also is sustainably developing, there is always going to be some kind of instability, which affects even those that are successful. And then if you look at, you might become an entrepreneur. If you become an entrepreneur, again, the depth of your pocket is not the main thing. But what is going to be important is that also look at corporate social responsibility and look at social entrepreneurship so that indeed you help those who are not in as good a position as yourself to help themselves. So youth, of course, can achieve this because you have a place at the table. I don't know if you agree with me, but in the United Nations, whether you're talking about climate change or you're talking about disaster reduction or even peace, there is always a role at the table for young people to have their voice. And we hope that those voices become amplified as we move towards 2030, because indeed the solutions are for you and the future is for you. So I thank you very much with that presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dennis. Those are really important points, especially for this goal that is really, less explored. So I really hope, all of you are able to, get the points that were really stressed with all our speakers, and also, and if you have any questions for Dr. Dennis, in the interest of time, I really appreciate if you can put it in the chat. And Dr. Dennis, if you don't mind, to address them on the chat as well, because we are really, a little bit over time. So for now, I've just, again, as this session closes, I'd just like to thank all our wonderful speakers and the youth speakers for all your really, inspiring stories and also important recommendations that I hope, we can all take to heart and also, put it into our work as well. So with this, I would like to thank you all for letting me moderate this session, and I would like to welcome for the next call to action session, my colleague Naz. Take it away.
Thank you, everybody. And after this inspiring session that we had with so many important discussions, and we've also been following your comments on chat, lots of important issues also coming up. So this is the time when we actually get together within our country and sub-regional groups to have the dialogue for the Youth Call to Action session. So we're going to follow the same format from yesterday. Yesterday, you all had a very fruitful discussion on SDG 4 and 5. So we're going to do the same thing today. So further to today's plenary that we had today, we will zoom into climate action SDGs. And we will, of course, look into SDG 13, which is, again, a cross-cutting SDG, but more specifically on SDG 14, 15, and also 17. Which, as you all know, 14 stands for life below water, SDG 15 on life on land, and SDG 17, as we just heard from our last speaker, on partnership for the goals. So the question for today's session, as you can see displayed on screen, is twofold. Number one, what is the impact of COVID-19 on the respective youth communities with respect to SDG 14, 15, and 17? And here we kept a reminder note for you all to also discuss SDG 13. And also provide your recommendations on how we can build back better from COVID-19 on these particular SDGs.